The night was thick with smoke and screams as the Blackwater burned behind them. Stannis Baratheon's boots crunched over the broken stones of King's Landing, his banner of the burning heart rising above the Red Keep, silhouetted by the fires still eating through the harbour. Men still fought in the lower city, but the battle had already been won. They had broken through the Mudgate. Ser Davos was gone, swallowed by wildfire. Half the fleet was ash, but Stannis had taken the walls with sheer numbers and fury. Lannister reinforcements never came. Tywin's host had been delayed by a skirmish at the Mander, and the Tyrells had never committed their banners at all. Timing had doomed the Lions. Stannis entered the throne room, not with cheers, but silence. The Iron Throne loomed in the shadows like a cursed relic. Ser Imry Floron, bloodied and limping, stood at his side, and Melisandre watched quietly, her red eyes glinting beneath the hood of her crimson cloak. The throne was empty. Cersei had vanished, and Joffrey had been dragged from the Sept of Baelor by the gold cloaks, who'd chosen to surrender rather than die. "What do we do with the boy?" one asked. Stannis stared at the crown in the child's trembling hands. "Bring him to the square," he said. At first light, that morning King's Landing awoke to the sound of hammering and the scent of ash. Civilians cowered in their homes as Baratheon soldiers swarmed the streets. Bells rang, not for celebration, but mourning. In the center of the square stood a scaffold, and atop it King Joffrey, stripped of his gilded armor, shivering in thin linen. His golden hair stuck to his face, blood crusted under his nose. Cersei was nowhere to be found. Rumors claimed she had poisoned herself in the night. Others whispered she had fled into the tunnels beneath the keep. Melisandre stood beside the boy, murmuring prayers in a tongue no one understood. Stannis stepped forward. His voice rang across the hushed square. This boy was no king. He was born of incest, a false lion who ruled by cruelty and corruption. Let this city know, justice has returned. He raised his hand. The executioner stepped forward. Joffrey screamed something, pleading maybe or cursing, but it was drowned out by the clang of the sword. When his head dropped into the basket, there was no cheer, only silence. In the days that followed, the realm held its breath. Ravens flew from the Red Keep declaring Stannis Baratheon, first of his name, rightful king of the Andals and the First Men. Lords who had knelt to the Lannisters now faced a choice: submit or burn. Some, like the River Lords, accepted him quickly. Others, like Dorne and the Reach, held back. But the North still named Robb Stark as king. And though Robb had sent envoys, Stannis refused any alliance that recognized another crown. "One king sits the Iron Throne," he said, "or the kingdom dies divided." Inside the capital, things grew colder. The small folk had once feared Joffrey's madness, but they had learned to navigate it. Stannis's justice was something else, quiet, swift, and merciless. Thieves lost hands. Gold cloaks, who had turned their cloaks during the battle, were flayed on the gates. The brothels were closed. The High Septon was replaced with a red priest. Melisandre burned 7 noblemen for treason in their hearts, though no crimes had yet been proven. The people began to whisper, not of freedom, but of fire, and still Stannis ruled. He never smiled, never celebrated. He sat the throne like a man seated on a funeral pyre, waiting for it to be lit. Word reached the capital. Tywin Lannister had vanished into the Westerlands. With him were 2,000 men and his last living son, Jaime. They were regrouping at Casterly Rock. From the Reach came no support, as Marguerite Tyrell had refused to marry Stannis, calling him a king of ashes and shadows. And in the north, Rose Bolton was marching not south, but toward Winterfell. The war was not over, but that night, as Stannis stood alone in the Tower of the Hand, looking out at the city that hated him, Melisandre appeared beside him. "The true war is yet to come," she whispered, "and you are not ready." He didn't look at her. "I took the throne." She nodded. "But you have not taken the realm." From the window, the Red Priestess watched the stars. "Winter is coming," she said, "and only one fire can keep the cold away." The cold wind reached the walls of King's Landing earlier than expected that year. Not the cold of snow, but something deeper, the chill of unease that gripped the people from Flea Bottom to the halls of the Red Keep. Stannis Baratheon sat the Iron Throne, but his rule had not brought peace. It had brought judgment. Within a fortnight of his coronation, 3 noble houses in the Crownlands rose in rebellion. House Rosby refused to pay the new taxes. Their keep was razed. House Stokeworth sheltered Lannister loyalists. Its lord was burned alive in his own hall. The Crown lands were now quiet but not loyal. Fear had done what gold never could. Sir Imry Florent urged diplomacy. Melisandre urged purification. Stannis listened to both but trusted neither. He only trusted the truth, and the truth was this: the realm was bleeding, and he had no time to bandage it. Far in the west, Tywin Lannister had begun assembling his strength. Though humiliated, he remained dangerous. At Casterly Rock, he trained new levies, bought sellswords, and sent emissaries to Dorne and the Reach, offering gold, marriage, anything that would secure an alliance to unseat Stannis the usurper. And yet, no raven flew to the capital from Highgarden. The Tyrells had vanished from the game. Stannis knew what that meant. They were waiting in the north. Matters were worse. Robb Stark had broken the Lannisters at the Twins, taking Riverrun and pushing westward. He had named Edmure Tully his hand and offered peace to the Baratheon. Crown, if the North remained, sovereign. Stannis laughed when the offer reached him. Does the wolf offer peace to the stag as he chews its leg? But behind closed doors, Stannis knew Robb's strength. He knew the North would not be tamed by threats or fire. Melisandre urged him to look east, toward the Wall, where her flames showed shadows stirring in the snow. But Stannis had more immediate threats. That winter, in the ruined halls of Harrenhal, a quiet alliance was formed. Rose Bolton and Tywin Lannister met in secret, brokered by ravens and betrayal. The terms were simple. Bolton would betray the North from within, killing Robb Stark at the first opportunity. In return, he would be named Warden of the North, ruling as a Lannister loyalist once the wolf was dead. Tywin knew Stannis would never offer peace, so he planned to destroy both kings and return the realm to his hand, not with wildfire this time, but with daggers and gold. In the Red Keep, the halls were colder now. The small council was empty. No Varys, no Littlefinger. Sir Davos was presumed dead in the Blackwater, though Stannis kept a candle burning in his memory. Melisandre had moved her quarters to Maegor's Holdfast, converting the chambers into a red temple. At night, chants echoed through the walls, songs not, meant for mortal ears. The people called Stannis the Red King, not for his banners, but for the fires that burned nightly in the squares. Sacrifices, cleansings, executions, all in the name of justice. But justice had no warmth. One evening, a boy was brought before the king, thin, ragged, and burned at the edges. He'd survived the wildfire at Blackwater, clinging to driftwood, and now made his way back to the city. His name was Edric Storm, bastard of Robert Baratheon, and Melisandre's eyes burned brighter than ever when she saw him. There is power in his blood, she said. Royal blood, the blood of kings. Stannis stared at the boy, Robert's chin, his black hair, the same blue eyes that haunted every Baratheon. The child looked at him with fear. Melisandre stepped closer. Let me burn him. The king did not answer. The next day, riders arrived from the Wall. A black brother stood in the throne room, cloaked in frost and soot. His name was Jon Snow, and his face was grim. He told them of wights, of walkers, and of a king beyond the Wall, Mance Rayder, leading tens of thousands south. Not for conquest, but for survival. He looked into the eyes of the Red King. We need help, or the realm dies. Melisandre's breath caught in her throat. Her flames had shown this, the darkness, the snow, the rise of death in the north. And for the first time in weeks, Stannis stood from the Iron Throne. I will ride north, Melisandre smiled, but the boy Edric trembled. The journey north was a march of silence. Stannis rode at the head of 500 men, not nearly enough for a conquest, but more than enough to send a message. Behind him rode Jon Snow, grim-faced and quiet, still smelling of smoke and cold steel. Melisandre followed on a black mare, her red cloak untouched by the snow, her eyes forever on the sky. King's Landing did not weep when Stannis left. The lords he left behind obeyed in fear, not loyalty. Sir Imry Florent remained as hand, though whispers called him a puppet. The Red Priests had begun converting old septs into temples of R'hllor, and in the alleys of Flea Bottom, people spoke of a different fire, not the king's, but rebellion as Stannis crossed the neck. Snow began to fall. They reached Castle Black after 2 moons. Bones and frostbite marking the path of wildling corpses scattered through the haunted forest. The gates opened slowly, creaking like an old man's breath. The brothers of the Night's Watch stared in disbelief. The king of Westeros. At the wall, no banners, no trumpets, no lords, just the Red King in black armor, flanked by fire and ice. Lord Commander Jeor Mormont was dead, murdered at Craster's Keep. The watch was leaderless, ragged, and fractured. Men muttered of mutiny. Jon Snow had not lied. The wall was rotting from within, but Stannis was not a man to be daunted by rot. By nightfall, he had taken control. Melisandre stood atop the wall with him on the second night, the wind howling against their cloaks like wolves at a feast. The land beyond stretched endless and dead, a sea of white, broken only by black trees and dark shapes that moved when no wind stirred. "They are coming," she whispered. Stannis said nothing. "They do not fear kings or crowns. Only light," he turned to her, voice low. "Then light it." She smiled, lips like coals. The next morning a pyre was built, not for a criminal, not for a traitor, for Edric Storm. The boy had been kept close, fed and warm, even treated with rare kindness by the king. But now he stood trembling beside the logs, staring up at the sky. He knew the fire was not for warmth. It was for power. Jon Snow begged the king. "He's just a child." "So was the bastard of Winterfell," Stannis replied coldly. "But you fought the dead. You saw what's coming." Jon looked at Edric, then back at Stannis. There's always a choice. Stannis didn't answer. He only turned away. The fire lit the night sky like a second sun. Men of the Night's Watch wept. Others turned their heads. Melisandre sang in the old tongue, arms raised, as the boy's screams filled the air. Jon did not look away. He stood at the foot of the pyre, face locked in cold fury, and when it was done, when only ash remained, the winds changed. The snow slowed, and Melisandre whispered, "The power is his now." In the weeks that followed, Stannis led the brothers of the Watch and his own men beyond the wall. The battle against the wildlings at the Frostfangs was swift and brutal. Mance Rayder captured, his army shattered in snow. But that was not the victory. The victory came in the night, for as the camp slept, and the wounded whimpered by firelight, the first white came screaming from the snow, a woman's corpse, its mouth torn open, ice for eyes, talons for hands. It tore into men as if they were paper. They set it aflame. But then came another, and another, and another. By dawn, Stannis Baratheon had seen the true enemy. The survivors returned to Castle Black, bloodied and shaken, but alive. Melisandre burned the white corpses under moonlight, her voice rasping with exhaustion. Jon Snow stood before the king again, face pale. "I told you," Stannis nodded slowly. "And now the realm must know." Jon hesitated. "What of the Iron Throne?" Stannis looked out beyond the wall again, eyes hard. "Let the lions roar. Let the wolves howl. Let them play their games." He turned to Jon. "If I don't stop this, there won't be a throne left to sit." But in the south, Tywin Lannister had not been idle. Ravens flew from Casterly Rock to Highgarden, and after months of silence, Marguerite Tyrell agreed to marry Tommen Baratheon, the last surviving son of Cersei, hidden and raised in secret. In the Sept of Oldtown, under Tyrell protection, Tommen was crowned. The war was reborn. 2 kings now ruled Westeros, one who fought the dead at the edge of the world, and one who wore gold and roses in the sun-soaked halls of the south. At Castle Black, Stannis stood before the great fire pit, its flames flickering high in the wind. Behind him, his men waited in silence. Melisandre's presence loomed at his side like a shadow that breathed. She had begun calling him Azor Ahai Reborn, the promised warrior of flame, and some had begun to believe her. Jon Snow did not. He watched as the Red Woman pressed her hand to Stannis' breastplate and whispered something in her strange tongue. The king's eyes closed. Whether it was prayer or magic, Jon couldn't say, but each day Stannis seemed harder, more distant, more hollow. Burning Edric's storm had changed him, or maybe it had just shown what was always there. As the fires burned in the north, so too did war rekindle in the south. From Old Town, a raven reached Casterly Rock, sealed with gold and thorns. The Tyrells had crowned King Tommen, naming Tywin Lannister as Lord Protector and Margaery Tyrell as Queen-to-be. Tommen's claim was weak, but Tywin's army was not, and with Highgarden's vast grain stores and soldiers at his side, Tywin had what Stannis lacked: food, men, and legitimacy in the eyes of those too tired for more war. And yet, he did not march. Tywin knew better than to fight ice and fire with steel. Instead, he bled the north from afar. It began subtly. A raven reached the Dreadfort. A sealed letter, a simple offer. Within weeks, Roose Bolton turned. Under the guise of pledging fealty to Stannis, he moved to secure the north. But instead of uniting the lords under the Baratheon banner, he sowed doubt, suspicion, and fear. He arrested Karstark men in the night, seized Hornwood lands for himself, sent envoys to the Freys. Jon Snow received reports of mass arrests in White Harbor, of missing daughters, of lords disappearing en route to Winterfell, and all of them swore they served the true king, Stannis. When Jon brought the letters to the king, Stannis read them in silence. The firelight danced in his eyes. Finally he looked up. "Bolton is carving a kingdom under my name. He'll turn on you," Jon said. "He already has." Jon hesitated. "You need to go to Winterfell." "The North won't rally from the wall." Stannis shook his head. "I cannot split my forces, not with death waiting beyond the trees." But Melisandre stepped forward, voice low. "There is another way. Light a beacon. Let fire lead the North. Send the wolf." Jon blinked. "Me?" she smiled. "You are Stark. In blood, if not in name." Stannis studied him. "Go to Winterfell. Speak with the Manderleys, the Umbers, the Glovers. Make them remember the name Stark, and if Bolton refuses peace." Stannis looked into the fire. "Then burn him." Jon left Castle Black with 20 men, cloaked in blackened snow, the direwolf ghost pacing beside his horse. He carried no crown, no banner, only a letter from the king and the weight of his dead father's legacy. The journey to Winterfell was brutal. Frozen rivers, storms that tore through flesh. Half his escort froze before they reached the weeping water, but the North had not forgotten. In White Harbor, Lord Wyman Manderley met him in secret, tears in his eyes at the sight of Ned Stark's bastard. "We knelt to the wrong kings," he said, "but we still bleed Stark. In Last Hearth, the Greatjon's son, half mad from grief, gave Jon a battered sword and 100 men, and when Jon finally reached the outskirts of Winterfell, he saw the flayed corpses hanging from the battlements. Bolton's message was clear: there are no wolves here, only leeches. Back at the wall, Melisandre stood before the flames, eyes wide with visions she refused to share. Stannis came to her silently. She turned to him. Voice trembling, "He will die," she whispered. "The boy, Snow, the North is drowning in blood." Stannis clenched his jaw. "Then I'll march on Winterfell myself." She touched his hand. "There is another way, a power older than fire. But it requires something more than sacrifice." "What?" She looked into the flames, as if afraid to speak. "Love." He pulled away. "I have no love to give." She nodded. "Then you have already lost." In the south, Tywin Lannister finally moved. Not with swordsmen, but with ink and coin. He sent word to Dorne, promising justice for Elia Martell if they remained neutral. He sent a fleet to the Stormlands, offering pardons to lords who abandoned Stannis, and from across the narrow sea, whispers began to stir of dragons in the east. The Game of Thrones had resumed, but the real war, the war for the soul of Westeros, was being fought in the snow, under the banner of a broken king and a bastard with a wolf's heart. Snow fell in thick sheets as Jon Snow stood on a ridge overlooking Winterfell. The once proud stronghold of House Stark now wore the skin of a corpse. Flayed men hung from the walls, the banners of House Bolton snapping like whips in the wind. Jon felt Ghost growl at his side, the direwolf's breath misting in the air like smoke from a dying fire. The North had come to Jon's call, reluctantly. The Manderleys, the Umbers, and the shattered remnants of minor northern houses had pledged men and food, but not without cost. They wanted Stark blood, not Baratheon fire. Jon's bastardy kept him always half-trusted, half-respected. The lords saw in him the ghost of his father, but they also saw illegitimacy, and worse, they saw weakness. They wanted vengeance, not diplomacy, and Jon wasn't sure he could stop what was coming. Inside Winterfell, Roose Bolton watched the snow from his solar. His eyes were cold as the season. Across from him sat Ramsay, his bastard-turned heir, sharpening a blade while whistling a nameless tune. "They gather," Roose said, voice like wind across ice. "Stannis sends wolves in his place." Ramsay grinned, teeth sharp. "I like wolves. They scream pretty when they're skinned." Roose looked at him, unmoved. "Kill Snow, break the Northerners before they unite, and bring me the heads of the Umbers." Ramsay stood, blade gleaming. "With pleasure, father." He didn't wait for permission. The doors slammed behind him. Jon's camp was a shadow of a proper army. The men were cold, hungry, and divided. House Manderley grumbled about Stannis' fire cult. The Umbers mocked Jon's black cloak. No one trusted the Red God, and fewer still trusted the king who burned boys, but they trusted Jon Snow. Barely. At the War Council, Lord Wyman Manderley leaned forward across the fire. "You ride under the banner of a king who burns his own kin, and yet you ask us to die for him." Jon met his eyes. "I don't ask you to die for Stannis. I ask you to fight for the North, for Winterfell, for the memory of the Starks." He glanced around the fire. "Because if Bolton wins, there won't be a North left." That night, when Jon lay down in his tent, he dreamt of wolves, of fire, of blood in the snow, and of a man in flames wearing a crown of ash. Dawn broke with screams. Ramsay's men struck before the sun rose, slipping through the snow-covered woods like ghosts. They set fire to tents, gutted sleeping soldiers, and left the Manderley supply wagons burning behind them. Jon awoke to steel, blood, and chaos. He fought like a wolf cornered, Ghost by his side, black cloak swirling like shadow. Ramsay came close. Jon saw him for the first time, grinning in the darkness, shirtless in the snow like a mad dog. But just as they met eyes, Ramsay vanished into the fog, leaving behind dead men and burning food. The North had been wounded. When Stannis arrived 3 days later, the survivors could barely believe it. He rode at the head of his knights, grim as death, his banner fluttering in the white wind. The fires of his camp rose quickly, smoke and heat swallowing the cold, but not the fear. The Northerners stared at him as one might stare at a ghost. The man who burned Edric's storm, the man who worshipped a red god, the man whose justice came without mercy. Stannis dismounted and walked through the camp in silence, eyes cold, armor frostbitten. When he reached Jon, he spoke only one word: report. Jon gave it to him straight. The numbers lost, the wagons burned, the scouts slain. Stannis said nothing, only stared into the snow as though trying to force the wind to obey. "We can't win in the open," Jon added. "They know the terrain." "We don't. Bolton plays like a hunter." Stannis looked at him, voice quiet. "I know hunters." He turned to Melisandre, who waited beside a dying fire. "Show me." She knelt, hands over the flames, eyes rolling back. The flames danced, twisted, became shapes. "They're weak," she said, eyes alight, "but not broken." Roose does not trust Ramsay. The bastard's madness will be our key. Stannis nodded once. Then we break him first. That night, Jon led a small party under the cover of darkness. Manderley scouts, Glover bowmen, and a few of Stannis's best riders. Their goal was simple: capture one of Ramsay's lieutenants, bleed him for information, and turn his own tactics against him. They found the camp deep in the Wolfswood, a small hunting party. Ramsay was not there, but his men laughed as they roasted meat over the fire. Drunk on their last raid, Jon struck first. The fight was quick, brutal. No mercy was given. Not to those who wore the flayed man, but one man survived. His tongue was loosed by a knife and the threat of fire. "Ramsay plans to open the gates," he hissed. "He'll lure your army in, trap you inside Winterfell. He's already salted the corridors for burning." Jon felt his blood go cold. They weren't just fighting for Winterfell. They were walking into a slaughterhouse. Stannis listened to the report with clenched fists. "He plans to burn Winterfell rather than lose it." Melisandre tilted her head. "Fire consumes all, but some fires consume the soul." Jon looked at the king. "Then we stop him, now, before he lights the match." Stannis stared into the night. No mercy, no more delays. He drew his sword. "At dawn we march on Winterfell." The dawn came like a blade through the clouds, sharp, cold, and silent. Snow fell in gentle swirls over the field outside Winterfell, covering the frozen earth in a blanket of false peace. The calm before a storm. Stannis Baratheon stood at the front of his line, black armor dull in the light, the stag and flame banner hanging heavy in the still air. Beside him, Jon Snow adjusted the grip on Longclaw, the Valyrian steel feeling colder than usual. Ghost prowled behind him, snarling low and constant. Around them, the forces of the north and the south stood together in a rare, uneasy alliance. Stannis' knights, Manderley spearmen, Umber cavalry, and black-cloaked veterans of the Night's Watch, all gathered beneath the burning eye of vengeance. Ahead, Winterfell brooded like a beast in the snow. Its gates were closed. No riders came to meet them, but they were not waiting in fear. They were waiting with fire. Stannis raised his sword. "Burn their false banners. Break their cursed gates." He did not shout. He did not need to. The first assault struck like a hammer. The Umbers led the charge on horseback, crashing into the frozen moat with ladders and grappling hooks. Stannis' siege engineers, what few had survived Blackwater, brought forward heavy rams. Archers loosed flaming arrows at the walls, where Bolton crossbowmen fired down from behind crenellations smeared with blood. For the first hour, it was chaos. The battlefield became a storm of screams and smoke. Men slipped in red snow. Horses screamed and fell into icy pits. But then a sound cut through it all. A horn long and deep from the inner walls. The gate opened, and out came Ramsay Bolton, riding a black horse, a smile stretched too wide across his face. Behind him surged 200 men, all clad in mismatched armor, half mad with bloodlust, Bolton's personal guard, the dogs of the Dreadfort. They didn't charge. They played. Ramsay rode straight for the center of the field, laughing as arrows missed him by inches. "Come on, little Snow," he screamed. "Come reclaim your kennel." Jon saw him and felt a fire rise in his chest. It wasn't the Red God's fire. It was older, colder, the kind that lived in wolves. He broke from the line. Ghost followed. Silent as death, Ramsay's smile widened. Jon spurred his horse, riding hard across the field. The noise faded. Only the thunder of hooves, the rush of wind, and the sound of ghosts snarling beside him. When they met, it was not like a duel. It was a collision. Ramsay swung first, missing by inches. Jon's counterstrike knocked the bastard's blade from his hand. Ramsay fell, rolled, and came up laughing with a knife in each hand. "Come, bastard," he sneered. "Let's see whose blood the Snow likes better." They fought under the open sky, two bastards born of cold and cruelty. Ramsay was quick, feral. But Jon had fought the dead. He'd killed Corran Halfhand. He had bled for the Wall. And he knew what it was to lose everything. Ramsay didn't. Ramsay had always been the predator, until now. The final blow drove Longclaw through Ramsay's chest, splitting armor and bone. He didn't scream. He just looked surprised. Like he couldn't believe it. that death had fatally come for him. Jon knelt beside him as the life left his eyes. "No more games," he whispered. "Ghost," howled. The death of Ramsay shattered the Bolton line. Rose Bolton, still inside Winterfell, saw the gates collapse as Stannis' men breached the walls. Fires began to spread, not by Bolton's order, but by accident. In the chaos, the storehouses caught flame. Smoke filled the courtyards. Rose stood by the high window of the great hall, the sounds of dying men echoing below. He had ruled through fear, through precision. But the chaos now, it was something he could not command. He turned to his steward. "Ready my horse," but he was already too late. Stannis Baratheon entered the hall with sword drawn, smoke curling behind him. Blood spattered his cloak. His eyes found Rose's immediately. "You call yourself Warden of the North," he said quietly. "You are neither." Rose stepped forward with careful poise. "You burn children. I flay traitors. We are not so different." Stannis looked down at his own hands. "I know what I am." Then he looked back up. "And I still know what justice is." The sword fell once. Rose Bolton's head hit the stone. The Battle of Winterfell was over by nightfall. Stannis stood on the ramparts, looking over the ruined courtyard. Fires still burned. Men wept. The snow was red. But Winterfell, the heart of the North, had been reclaimed. Jon stood beside him, bloodied and silent. His sword was sheathed. Ghost sat beside him, calm now. "You've won," Jon said. Stannis shook his head. Stannis shook his head. "I've only bought time." They looked to the north, where the walls stood like a grave marker on the horizon. "The dead are coming," Stannis said. And now the realm might listen. Below them, in the crypts of Winterfell, Melisandre lit a single candle. She knelt beside the old tombs of the Stark kings, whispering to the shadows. "They must rise, or all shall fall, and somewhere in the cold wind," a voice whispered back, Winterfell had been won, but not saved. The fires were out, the bodies buried or burned, and the snow now fell quietly over the battered keep like a fresh shroud. The banners of House Bolton had been torn down, replaced with the stag of House Baratheon, and at Jon Snow's urging, the dire wolf of House Stark. But neither symbol brought comfort. The north was bleeding, and the wind howled louder each night. Inside the great hall, the new court of King Stannis I was grim and hollow. The surviving lords of the north bent the knee one by one. Manderley, Umber, Glover, and a dozen others. They pledged loyalty, but their eyes flickered with doubt. They feared the Red God, and they feared the Red King even more. Stannis didn't care. "I'm not here to be loved," he told them. "I am here to stop the world from ending." But for Jon Snow, something had changed. The moment he stepped into the crypts, the walls seemed to breathe around him. He passed the tombs of his ancestors, kings of winter carved in stone, until he found himself standing before Ned Stark's statue. The face carved in granite looked nothing like the man Jon remembered. It was too hard, too still. He knelt. "I've done what you couldn't," he whispered. "I've come home." From behind him a voice spoke. "Have you?" It was Melisandre. Cloaked in red, face pale in the candlelight, Jon stood slowly. "I'm not in the mood for riddles." She stepped closer. "You are not your father's son." Jon's heart skipped. She raised her hand. "I have seen it. In flame, in blood. Your name is not Snow." He stared at her. "What are you saying?" Melisandre's voice was barely above a whisper now. "You are ice and fire. Born of dragon's blood and the wolf's howl. You are the song, the sword, the sacrifice." Jon shook his head. No, but something inside him already knew. Elsewhere in Winterfell, Stannis Baratheon sat alone by a dying fire, reading a letter brought from the wall. It bore the mark of the Night's Watch. Its contents were short. Its message final: "Eastwatch has fallen. The dead walk. The wall will not hold much longer." He closed his eyes. So it begins. The next day, riders were sent from Winterfell in every direction, to White Harbour, to Bear Island, to the last surviving watchtowers. Stannis commanded every man, every blade, every horse be gathered and sent north to the wall. "We do not wait for the storm to reach our gates," he said to his lords. "We ride into it. The lords obeyed even if they feared they were riding to their deaths. That night, the stars disappeared, and for the first time, snow fell red. A scout returned from the gift, wide-eyed and stuttering. His words were fragments, but the message was clear. The dead. They don't walk. They run, they hunt. Jon met with Stannis in the Godswood, the weirwood tree's red leaves twisting in the wind. They're getting closer, he said. Stannis looked up. Then we fight sooner. Jon shook his head. We won't win with steel. Not unless we know how to kill them. All of them. Melisandre entered from the shadows. I can help, she said. But fire will not be enough. Jon turned to her. What will? She paused, then said, truth. In the weeks that followed, Winterfell transformed into a fortress once more. Walls were reinforced. Dragonglass was mined from old caches beneath the Dreadfort and Deepwood Motte. Blacksmiths worked through the night, forging new weapons, spears, arrows, blades. Melisandre led rites in the Godswood, calling on old powers no longer named, and in the dark woods beyond the wall. The Night King marched, not slowly, not silently. Villages vanished. Towers went dark. Even ravens stopped flying, and behind him, thousands of corpses walked in lockstep silence. Children, soldiers, bears, giants, all eyes glowing pale blue. Then one night, as the moon vanished behind the clouds, the first shadow fell over the wall, a horn. It blew once, twice, then a third time. The dead were here. The third blast of the horn echoed like a death knell. Across the icy stones of Castle Black, men dropped their cups. Fires were smothered by wind. The Night's Watch stood frozen atop the wall, staring northward, where a vast darkness moved beneath the stars. Not shadows, not men, not wolves, the dead, and leading them mounted on a pale undead steed, stood a figure taller than the rest, the Night King, crowned in frost, silent and eternal. The wall had held for 8,000 years, but that night it fell. At Eastwatch, the first attack began, not with siege ladders or fire, but with cold. A deep, unnatural frost that shattered stone and steel. Then came the giants, reanimated and roaring without breath, smashing through gates like tinder. Wights swarmed like insects, climbing the frozen walls with twisted limbs and broken teeth. The men fought bravely. They died faster. Some took their own lives before they could be turned. But in the end, even death was not an escape. Word reached Winterfell 2 days later. Riders arrived black with frostbite, half mad from what they'd seen. The wall is broken, they gasped. The dead are marching, and no one is stopping them. In the great hall, the lords of the north stood silent. Some wept, some prayed, and Stannis Baratheon, grim and pale, stood from his chair and unsheathed his sword. We meet them at the last river. We make our stand there. Jon Snow stepped forward. No. He looked around at the faces, some familiar, some bloodied, all terrified. If we fight them like men, we lose. They don't bleed. They don't fear. We can't kill them with swords alone. He turned to Melisandre. Tell them. The Red Woman stepped forward, her voice like smoke and fire. There is only one way to stop the dead. Fire and magic. Yes, but also blood. Jon tensed. Stannis frowned. We've already sacrificed. Melisandre shook her head. Not enough. She looked at Jon. You are the last fire the North has. The last true blood of kings and dragons. I can give you the strength to fight him. The power to destroy the Night King. But only if you accept the truth of who you are. Jon's voice was barely a whisper. And who am I? Her eyes glowed. Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar, the prince that was promised. The hall erupted into shouts, confusion, disbelief, even laughter, but Stannis did not laugh. He looked at Jon, and he saw it now. The black hair, the solemn eyes, not Stark, not Snow, but dragon. That night, Jon stood in the Godswood, beneath the weirwood tree. The snows fell silently, as if the world were holding its breath. Stannis approached, slow and quiet. I don't care about thrones, Jon said. I never have. Stannis said nothing for a while. Then neither did I until I had to. He stepped closer. Melisandre believes you're Azor Ahai, a hero. A weapon, Jon looked up. And what do you believe? Stannis met his eyes. I believe you're the only one who can kill that thing. So if she's right, I'll follow you into the dark. A long silence passed. Then Jon said, then ride with me. The Battle of the Last River was not a battle, it was annihilation. The armies of men stood in frozen ranks. Stannis' knights, northern bannermen, wildlings, the Night's Watch, and even remnants of the Vale who had marched north in secret. Jon Snow led the vanguard, Ghost at his side. Melisandre stood at the rear, surrounded by burning pits and braziers. Chanting spells older than Westeros itself, they fought bravely. They died in droves, the dead came in waves, silent and relentless. When a man fell, he rose moments later, now wearing blue eyes and a twisted grin. The sky turned black. But then it changed. As Jon stood bloodied, knee-deep in corpses, he saw the Night King across the field, still, watching, waiting, daring him. Jon stepped forward, Longclaw in hand. The world went silent. He charged. Steel met ice. The Night King drew a blade of frozen mist, blocking Jon's strike. The two clashed in the center of the battlefield, surrounded by corpses and fire. The air itself seemed to shatter around them. Longclaw clanged against the icy blade, again and again, until finally Jon fell. His sword shattered. The Night King raised his blade for the final blow, and then fire. Melisandre's scream cut through the night as she hurled her final spell. The godswood at Winterfell ignited, flames reaching high into the sky. Every brazier exploded. Fire poured across the field in great rivers of light, and Jon rose again, not as a man, not as a prince, but as something more. Eyes like storm, breath like frost. Fire in his blood, he seized the Night King's blade with his bare hand and did not burn. Then he drove dragonglass through the Night King's heart. The dead froze mid-step, and then they shattered. The night ended, the snow stopped, and silence returned. In the days that followed, the survivors buried their dead, burned the rest. Stannis Baratheon returned to Winterfell, limping and wounded, his crown bent and dented. He knelt before Jon Snow. You saved the realm, Jon shook his head. I saved the people. Let the realm sort itself out. He left the north soon after. Alone, heading south into legend, winter had come and passed. The fire had burned long enough, and in its ashes something new began to grow.